Hi guys, welcome back to Chess the Matthew. So on this video, we'll tackle about the opening of Damiano Defense, which start with the moves of e4, e5, and after, for example, the white plays knight f3 and attack the e5 pawn, and here the black defends e5 pawn with an f6 move. So after f6, we shall reach now the Damiano Defense, in which the black here intends to defend his pawn with f6 pawn, allowing his king here to be exposed on this diagonal from h5 to a8. Because, for example, on this position, the white here can simply grab the e5 pawn and open the diagonal for the queen to d1 to h5, for example, on this position, and tries to sacrifice his knight for a pawn, for example, after f takes e5 on this position, in which the black here was actually totally exposed from queen h5 check to his black's king on this position, because the g6 on this position actually doesn't work, because there is a simple queen h5 check and with an attack on the rook on h8 that actually forks the king and rook. And for example, if the black here defend against the check, but he loses a rook on the h8. So going back, for example, after f takes h5, in which it actually expose his king side on this position via a check, for example, on h5. And let's say, for example, if the black doesn't actually block the check with g6, but instead just to play the move king e7, just escape the check from the queen, but still there is a queen h5 check and a forced move to king f7. But after king f7, there is bishop to c4 check, and the only square he can go is actually king g6, even though he can actually block the check with his d7, but still it is the same. For example, after bishop takes d5, and for example, after the black here plays king g6 to escape the check, but still there is queen f5 check. And after, for example, king h8, the only square he can go, but still there is queen h4 with support, for example, to g5 after, for example, d4 with an open check for the bishop on c1. For example, after g5, there is just a simple capture to the g5 after g5 block to the check on bishop. And for example, after queen e7, but still there is just simple d4 with an open check, for example, on the bishop, like I said. And after a block up check to g5, but still there is bishop takes g5 check. And on this position, he cannot actually go for king to h5 because there is g4 and it leads to a checkmate. So the only square he can go for the king is to g7. But after a couple of moves, after bishop takes, in which the white here wins a queen, and after, for example, queen f7 check, king h6, g4 intending to g5 to threat a mate, and after, for example, d5, g5 check, and after bishop takes g5, h takes g5 check, king takes g5, rook h5 check, and the only square he can go is king g4. But after king g4, it is already checkmate after 17 moves with bishop to e2 checkmate, because the black here can no longer escape the check, cannot escape, he cannot cover, so it is already now a checkmate. So going back on the initial moves after e4, e5, knight f3, f6, the Damiano Defense, although it looks like a scary moves after knight takes e5, in which the black here is actually totally losing if the black capture the knight with f takes e5. But if we flip the board on this position, as we look for the black's perspective on this position, in which after, for example, e4, e5, knight f3, f6, and knight takes e5, we shall see in this position now that we should not play f takes e5 here, because we will lose immediately after queen h5 check. So the proper defense here in using the Damiano Defense is to play queen e7 to attack the knight and the pawn on e4. So that, for example, after queen e7, in which there is now two attackers to the knight, in which the queen here can actually grab the knight on e5 rather than to play f takes e5 on this position. So the white here was actually forced to retreat his knight to f3. And after, for example, d5, opening some lines for our bishop and actually forcing this undefended pawn with actually two attackers with non-defender. For example, the white here defend with d3, but we shall see in this position now that we have two attackers versus one defender, so we can immediately take back our pawn deposit on this position, and after, for example, d takes e4. But there is just a simple queen takes e4 check. And after a cover bishop to e2, we can simply develop our knight into c6 and to control the center, and again vacating the square so that later on we can castle on the queen side. For example, we shall see that the white here was actually ready to castle on the king side, and for example, after castling, we simply play bishop d7, and after, for example, the white here has actually a threat to play rook e1 with a discover attack. After, the white here can play bishop b5 and skewer our queen and king on this position. But still on this position, after rook e1, we can timely have a queenside castling in this position and stopping those tricky skewer attack from the discovered move of bishop to b5. So going back after e4, e5, knight f3, f6, the Damiano defense, and after knight takes e5, we should not play here f takes e5 here immediately, but to play the move queen to e7 to force a claim for a draw on this position, because for example, after knight f3, d5, opening up some lines for our bishop and pressurizing this e4 pawn, and for example, d3, pawn takes, and after we can simply grab our defensive pawn on e4, and after a cover up check, knight c6, kingside castling for white, and after bishop d7, rook e1, and queenside castling, and we can easily conclude on this position as we actually evaluate the position that it is actually a draw. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to subscribe.